Hi, good afternoon to everyone in Berlin. And if you're connecting to us from other parts of the world, good morning, good evening. Today, we are hosting Firoozeh Farvardin, and she's going to be talking about the feminist revolution and protests in Iran. And from a very interesting feminist perspective, which focuses on government policies. And without further ado, I leave the floor to Firoozeh. Welcome. And thank you so much for being here with us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone here and here also. Good morning, good evening to all of you. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I would like to thank you all, particularly Agata, Aisuda, and Cassandra. I think she's going to be online. And yeah, because of giving me this opportunity to, share what I know about the current revolutionary movement in Iran, but also for, get more feedback and exchange about, feminist struggles all around the world. So I'm ready to start.
Before we start, I just want to point out that after the lecture, there will be a question and discussion. We're in, the session is in recording. We're recording this session.
Yeah, we need to make sure that we have admitted everybody who's waiting in the...
Yes, there's one more person now.
So we will need to...
So we should be careful with the button.
And
yeah.
And from there, okay. And you logged in into two devices?
Okay. Would you please let me know how it's going to the back and forth?
Yeah.
Because I'm not Apple person.
Okay, so this is the front, and this is
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
So shall I start? Yeah. So as you can see from the title of my presentation, I'm going to talk about roots and consequences of the current revolutionary movement in Iran that for many is actually the feminist revolution. I will talk about this later, about how we should or we should not talk about the feminist revolution or feminist in the title. But what I'm aiming to do is actually to, yes, I think it's, yeah, they're echoing the voice.
No, I saw that. Yeah, it's my computer and I write on music, but okay. Go ahead.
So I'm going to talk about the condition of possibility of what's now we are witnessing. But before going into the, the presentation, I think it's important to give you a context of what's now happening. So I'm just reading the very short account of what's happening in Iran since the 16th of September 2022. So on the 16th of September 2022, Jina, also known as Mahsa Amini, a young Kurdish woman, was arrested in Tehran by the morality police, also known as, hijab police in Iran, for wearing hijab improperly in public. A few hours after her arrest, she was taken to a hospital in critical condition. Eyewitness said that she had been insulted, severely beaten, while in the police van. She died in the hospital a few days later after falling into the coma. Following her burial, despite the pressure of the state security forces, a large protest took place in her hometown Sakres in the province of Kurdistan, where many women unveiled themselves in public and chanted Jin Jiyan Azadi, a well-known Kurdish slogan which translates to woman life freedom and Zan Zendegi Azadi in Farsi. As you may know, the slogan has its own root in transnational Kurdish struggles in the region, which become popular in Kurdistan context, and particularly after the Rojava uprising in 2014. The day after the funeral and the public en masse unveiling of Kurdish women in Sakres, the protests erupted all across the country, which despite the severe suppression, still continue up to now, of course, with the ups and downs. So these ongoing protests are by far the largest ever happened in the time of the Islamic Republic. I mean, these 4 decades of its rule, and it goes to every corner of Iran. It's more than 164 cities kind of involved this, and also many villages. So it is also the longest round of the contentious politics in the history of the Islamic Republic that has created most serious crisis of the Islamic regime. Likewise, the movement bridges the diasporic politics and activities and transnational solidarity demonstration. Also, we were witness here, and is connected with the internal protests in Iran. The ongoing revolutionary movement is also unique in a sense, as I mentioned before, that marked by many of participants and also observers as a women-led revolution. So I'm going a bit to talk about this. So regarding this kind of the background that I explained, this introduction, this question also relevant to ask that how does this current revolutionary movement actually relate to feminist movement and struggles in Iran and beyond? What can it offer to various ongoing transnational feminist struggle across the world? And what lesson we can learn for the future of the struggles all around the world, and particularly against patriarchy, neoliberalism, authoritarianism, and so on. I think I tried in my kind of presentation to somehow answer this question from my own studies and perspective as someone active also in diasporic politics and feminist movement inside and outside Iran. So in this lecture, I will try to answer some of this question by first addressing the historical context of political discontent and mobilization against gender and social politics of the Islamic Republic in the past 4 decades of his rules. And also based on this contextualization, I will discuss, of course, very briefly, meaning and implication of calling this revolution feminist one. And then I will a bit also discuss about the impacts of this movement on ongoing feminist struggle across the world, and hopefully we can discuss further about this aspect of my presentation. So needless to say that the current revolutionary movement in Iran is not born out of void. There is a historical context of this revolutionary movement that actually run and, advocated by feminists, or I would say that feminized bodies. I kind of refer to feminized bodies many times in this presentation, because I want to stress that it is a social position that put the person in that position, not necessarily a subjective identification that one is feminine or not, but because of the subjugation position that can be addressed in this kind of situation. Also use, as you can see, on Star for Women, that is also well known in the context of Germany. That's more, it's a more kind of referring to a more inclusive discussion about the women in Iranian context. I would say that at the beginning, from the first days of the revolution, 1979 revolution, the issue of women and hijab was very highly contested. And it was just 2 days after the revolution that Khomeini, the supreme leader and the leader of the 1979 revolution, repealed the family protection law. That actually was a kind of the progressive law that passed in the late 1970s in Iran as an effort of the many state feminists, and also, there's some kind of the reforms that Shah kind of forced to accept it at the end. But this family protection law kind of repealed 2 days after the revolution in Iran. And then also some restriction imposed on the way that the women's dressed in public. So when it's many feminists and political activists heard about this kind of the pushback against women and misogynist regulation. They organized the 6 days of women-led protests in Iran, that thousands of the women and feminist activists actually joined this cause. And the biggest one was in Tehran in the 8th of March, 1979 in Tehran, that thousands, as you can see from the pictures, joined this demonstration to, oppose this new regulation, misogynist regulations. But it was not just limited to Tehran. We have in the different cities in Kurdistan, Sanandaj, Kermanshah, and the other big cities like Isfahan and Tabriz, some demonstration. So it is very important because it shows that women were the first from the early days of the revolution that were against the new government. Although it was not, unfortunately, at the time, was supported by many political organizations, among them leftist organizations. So, but then it follows by the Kurds and other national minority groups to go against oppose the Islamic regime. So in order to kind of better contextualize or have a historical account of what's happening in the past 4 decades of the Islamic Republic, I had a kind of offer a periodization that I don't know whether you already read my article. It's based on that, but it's actually extended and I revise it a bit because I'm now focusing not only on the gender politics of the state, but also different or transformation of the forms of resistance against the state. So it's kind of a bit not the same as what you already read. So the first decade of Islamic Republic, I would the name of war of feminized bodies because of the extension of the logic of war on it. The second era is the post-war reform time, and it's a kind of the start of an introduction of a structural adjustment policy in Iran, but at the same time emergence of the form of Islamic feminism. For the first time in that era, we are talking about feminism. And then the third period is the time that we had again of kind of the pressure from the policy for policing feminized bodies, particularly what we know as the morality police. And then we had the last decade of the Islamic Republic that we have this neoliberal pronatalism that I also mentioned in my article and call it as a neopronatalist familialism. And yes, at the same time, it was a time, it was marked with also, intensification of contention politics and, political discontents in Iran, the last decade of Islamic Republic. So I'm going to briefly talk about each of these periods. So war of feminized bodies. So despite, this kind of the protest against the new regulations of the Islamic Republic at the beginning of the revolution, 1979, and they kind of the new government set back for a while. It was from the 1980s, there was a different kind of the policing bodies started that I would say that, of course, it was not right away become a law, but it was kind of practice in society. For example, you cannot easily go to the public offices or many places without having had hijab. Also, it was not part of the, the law. So it was a kind of an unwritten law that you cannot go, for example, be in a university, you cannot work, and if you don't have a kind of the hijab. But the law was kind of the passed on, I think, end of 1981, at the beginning of 1982, that it's become obligatory for all the women more than 9 years old to have some kind of hijab or veiling themselves in public. And it was also the case for the primary school. It means that even the schoolgirls in the age of 7 years old has to have, or 6 years old has to have something as a hijab and a specific formal dress. that kind of hide their hairs and specific dress code kind of imposed on them. And then it's also goes, and there is actually hand to hand to have a kind of gender segregation. So in many workplaces, educational sector, from the primary school to university and many public spaces, it was based on gender. You have different spaces to work and to live, to study. And then we have also the reviving Sharia penal code that used to actually existed before the time of the 1979 revolution. It was, but some part of it was suspended in the late Shah's era. This kind of suspended part of the penal code, Sharia penal code, that actually addressing and targeting transgressive gendered bodies was again revived and practiced at the time, unfortunately. That, for example, was the kind of stunning women's execution, and also long imprisonment to having, for example, sexual relation out of marriage, to having practicing homosexuality, or to have the sexual relation out of, as I said, out of marriage. So besides that, because of the domination of the logic of war and the needs for further soldiers for the Islamic Republic, the main frame of reproductive politics of the time was also pronatalist policies that actually directly and indirectly also enhanced the gender politics of the time, the misogynist politics of the time. And it includes annulment of family planning program and criminalization of the abortion, along with the annulment of family protection law. And then we also have the legal restriction on women holding public positions. And then due to cultural revolution in university, women's, particularly secular women's, are rejected in many academic disciplines. They basically purge many professors, many students were purged because they were not enough Islamic. So as you can see, and my argument is that we are kind of witnessing a merge of a gender apartheid regime in Iran at the time, but at the same time, as some of you also in their notes mentioned, it was very paradoxical, because gender segregation is something that, as you can know, is not something that you can imagine to help to women be in public, but in some occasion it's actually caused, because when you segregated gender based on gender, then you need to have more teacher, you need to have more health officers, or some people that working on this sectors that are gender based on their genders are different. So they kind of recruit a lots of new kind of the people in these two sectors that cause a kind of the change the ratio of the employment of women, at least at the beginning of the revolution. And another issues that is important and affect this matter is that many men were in the war. So then women needs to work because otherwise they couldn't, afford their life. So it was a very contradictory situation, because the logic of market, logic of living, and the needs for social reproductions forced some women to work, but at the same time they were kind of pushed back by the state in other sectors. So it's the things that we should always, when we analyze everything, have it is on our mind regarding the situation. So anyhow, despite all this kind of the pushbacks and misogynist regulation, I would say that the struggles continue, and one of the main wave of the struggles that women at the time was armed struggles. Many women, leftist women and Kurdish women, went went to Kurdistan, and from there as a headquarter, they were against the Islamic Republic started the armed struggles. And many years before the Rojava, there was Peshmerga, Kumela women that fighting against patriarchal state of Iran, and they have this kind of idea of having the equality and gender equality at the time. So as Anis just mentioned, from 1979 to 1980, 2008, more than 90 Kurdish fighters got executed in different prisons in Iran. Needless to say, so many of them were already killed in the battlefield, but just 90 of them also kind of executed at the time. So we had a different wave of massacres in Iran, political prisoners in Iran in the 1980s, and I don't know any family in Iran to not have someone in the family to got killed or executed or being in long imprisonment due to this severe suppression that they face in the 1980s. I think even right now it's not comparable with what's happening at the 1980s in Iran. So, but at the same time, the other women tried to somehow organize themselves. So they went underground, finding each other, started to reading and also reflecting on their own political activities. They started by criticizing their own organizations pre and after revolution, that they are not kind of considering the issues of gender equality as important. So many of them come out of their organizations because of that, because they thought that they are not, this leftist, mainly leftist organization is not, or liberal also, we're not that much serious about the danger of the Islamic Republic for women. So, and the only, I think it's the only things as far as I know, the only more or less publicly civil collective of the time was actually run on and also advocated by the women's, and it's known as the Mothers of Khavaran. Khavaran is the name of one of the graveyard of unknown graveyard of victims of the mass execution of political prisoner in Iran. So the mothers and relatives of these victims get together all around the country and then make these initiations to, seeking justice for the victims and to finding the justice for the society. So although they were under pressure, the women's but actually they are the only organized groups to, seeking justice beside armed struggles groups that's seeking justice for the society. Then it is time of the post-war era, and then the logic is totally different from the before that. And the most important things is that in terms of economic post-war government threw away the project of Islamization of the state, and they kind of using the framework of market economy because they need to construct the countries after several years of war with Iraq. So they kind of adopt developmentalism guideline, and they actually got help from IMF and other important financial institutions of the world, from the global financial institute. So basically they adopted what we know as a structural adjustment policies. That is nothing but, the way and guideline to be more integrated to the global market. So it has also an own logic reproduce in other aspects of society as well, including gender politics. For example, in terms of the policing hijab, at the in the first decade, we are witnessing that they are kind of arresting, lashing, and beating the peoples that doesn't have a proper hijab. But in this period, although it was more or less also practiced harassment, but the main focus was to imposing fines to get money out of issues of hijab. So it is really the logic was changed after the war. And another thing that is also important to mention is that they kind of relaunched family planning program, because in 1986 the census shows that the population growth in Iran is very high. It's 3.9 per year. And they need to kind of reduce this because they cannot afford such a things. And for the, construction of the country and, further developmentalizing the country, they need to have, control the population. So they relaunched the family planning program. And part of the relaunching and, accepting family planning program is to consider, to involve more involvement of the women's in activities, political and social activities. So because they need to kind of raise the illiteracy rate of women's and also involve them in a political, social participation and also labor market as a part of the institutional preparation of a structural adjustment policy, they kind of open up a space for more women to come to the society and become visible. And, the issues of gender equality become allowed to be part of the public debates. So for the first time, not all the women, but some Islamic women started to talking publicly about gender equality according to Quran, according to the Sharia law, and how it's kind of adopted with the women's become more kind of be in a public, be in the society, even have work, and it's not kind of the incomparable, it's not something against Sharia law. So they started to interpret this. So that's why I said that this is a kind of the time of rising and emergence of the state feminism, because they were kind of part of the government and part of the dominant groups, but at the same time they were Islamic feminists because they kind of started to reinterpreting the Islam according that is fit with the labor market, fit with the integration with the global market. At the same time, because it was open space, there were a lot that many feminist publishers publish their books, translate many works, and it's also at the time of the introduction of the cyberspace in Iran and internet. So women started to writing in the weblogs, in the forums, and get to connected with the world through internet. That is something very important, because the first decade of the Islamic Republic, they were very isolated in the society. So it's also kind of goes hands to hands with the NGOization in Iran as well. So the structural adjustment policies advice from the IMF is also have political consequences, that it's open somehow the space for social activism for women. Also many feminist seculars or leftists were kind of skeptical to involve in the formal NGOs because they were at the end kind of the controlled by the government, but many others thought that feminists, that it's a good occasion that they had go through this formal NGOs and work. So there were two different type of collectives actually born. Some of them were formal one through NGOs, and some of them were still kind of underground or not official through feminist collective. What is also very important at the time is that for the first time, you can also see increasingly visibility of the queer communities in Iran, because it was completely banned and you cannot talk about issues of the existence of them. But because of the internet, they find each other, and you can also see on the appearance or performance of body in the street for the first time. This community of LGBTQI+ people also in Iran, and they also it was the time that the first organization of the queer communities was born. Of course, through underground things, but they have their own networks in internet, and then the first Farsi language. Website and magazines, online magazines of LGBTQI+ individuals kind of published. The name is Maha. So as you can see, that era is very different from the previous era, but I would say that I think it's also I mentioned that it's not the intention of the state to do this. It is the consequence of the women were more active and in society and demanding, and they kind of also related to global situation that and logic of developmentalism that needs to Islamic state or Islamic regime to be more tolerate the others somehow. I want to explain about these pictures that I put here, because for me it's very important to mention. So this person at the left is the Khatami, the president of Iran at the time of the reformist era. And then the other woman at the time was a journalist, a state Islamist feminist, is Masih Ali-Nejad, that now has become the famous figure of right-wing opposition outside Iran, as you can see here. So she definitely changed her position regarding with whom is going to negotiate or, bargain. But at the end, the logic is the same, because state feminists always think that it's through the, bargaining and negotiating with the state that they can get what they want. And I think she is the figure of this kind of feminism that also kind of dominant narrative discourse of the time of the reform era. So the next period is the that I call the return of morality police and street politics together, is the kind of coincided with the presidency of Ahmadinejad. You may heard of his name, and it's we kind of witness ever-growing oppression again and pushback the gender policy of the regime started again to change. And the first things that happened is that they had the nude bill, hijab and modesty bill, because they kind of witness that women's dress more open in the society, and we didn't have the completely unveiled at the time, but what we had at the time in 2000 as a hijab is not comparable with what's women's have at 1980s. So basically the more traditional and more conservative part of the state kind of force and put pressure that you should change these policies and it's not acceptable. And then based on this new bill that led the kind of the law enforcement to again start to more arrest and punish, coercively punish the women that don't have a proper hijab. A new kind of the female squad come out of it, that is moral security police. During all these years of Islamic Republic, we always have the hijab police, but what we had now as a specific and more powerful form of the police hijab that kind of control everything regarding the, the way that women dress, or also how the gender segregation is implied or not. And then again, we started to witness the kind of the restriction on registering certain academic discipline for women, to say that, okay, it is more for men, some of these disciplines, because actually at the time, for the first time, it's one of the attainment of the women's that society in the previous period, that women's accepted in university more than men. So it was a kind of, the warning alarm regarding the situation that now women are more educated than men. And that's why they kind of put some more restriction on the situation. In terms of I forgot to mention that in terms of the work and participating in the labor market, also the peak is actually 2005, that female participation rate in labor market was around 18.5. That is the peak, or the kind of now is very less than this. It was the time of the reform era that it's become the peak, but as you can see, it's still not very promising, that is less than 20% of the women's actually work. So anyhow, I think this kind of attainment of women's in different aspects of the society caused that they have a pushback, and they kind of try to reinforce this gender segregation, moral police, and other stuff. But now women were more organized than before, and they kind of fight back against this new regulations that they want to, impose in their body. So that's why they kind of started gathering together, and they have actually the first kind of the gathering in the street. As you can see this picture, it is the 12th of June 2006 that the feminists called for, for the others to go out and, protest against this new regulation regarding different stuff, gender policies of the new regime, new government. And then a year after, they also do the same thing. So as an anniversary, they went in the 12th of June to protest. Actually, I was there in this, it's both of them, but I think at the second one, I was in the middle of the protest, and many of them in the second one that I haven't yet, I don't have the pictures here, many of them got arrested, beaten, and it was not allowed basically. And many of them got long imprisonment, 5 years, 6 years, just because they got together. So this day, 12th of June, kind of marked at since then as a Women's Solidarity Day in Iran. At the same time, this daily protest of women against compulsory whaling also continues. And I mean, every day. And now, because the videos got viral, that how they kind of vicious, the way that they kind of threaten the women, that they are not having proper hijab, got viral on the internet. The reaction also get very harsh. And then not only women, others that were around the person that's supposed to be arrested kind of react to the vans and patrol vans that wants to arrest them. So it's become an issue every day by day. Another interesting things that happened there at the time is the attempts of women, either individually or collectively, to enter football stadiums as a symbol of gender segregation. I would say that, because women cannot go to watch the football, men's football teams. So it was a kind of way of challenging this kind of gender segregation regulation as well. So it's become also another concern, and since then it is, and actually still they don't still allow the women go to the stadium, but become a part of their daily attempts to do something. But I would say that the most important iconic things that happen in this era, in this period of time, is a 1 million signature campaign against discriminatory law that was kind of launched in 2006. Many collectives and individuals get together, feminists, and launched this program that inspired, actually was the more or less similar campaign in Morocco. So as I said, that now the Iranian feminists somehow got connected with the world, with the transnational struggles, and now learn from the others that how they can fight back. So it was inspired by the Moroccan ones. But also at the end, they were not successful because they were suppressed to got 1 million signature of the campaign, and many of them went to jail and sentenced to long imprisonment. What's the campaign learned, many of us that were involved in this campaign, was to kind of this kind of dialogue that happens between more central feminist, white feminists, I would say that in Iran, the coming from Persian-speaking Shia, living in the big cities, with the peoples coming from more marginalized areas of Iran, like Kurdistan, Baluchistan. So they meet each other and started to dialogue, because it's a kind of campaign that you should go city by city and, have a workshop, talk with them. So it was a kind of the very important moment for many of us to see how this discrimination is not just the gender discrimination, and there are the different, of course, class also was part of the agenda, but I'm sure at the time it was not the case for the, national discrimination or ethnic discrimination. So it is get changed. Our mindset is started to change. And then all of the sudden, Green movement happens. That is actually, if you know, that is a kind of the protest, a very mass protest against this, electoral fraud, because they kind of did this fraud, election fraud, to make Ahmadinejad again president of Iran. It was a very huge demonstration, the biggest after the revolution. That is, many big cities, people come out, but there are some issues regarding that. It was also, again, very Farsi speaking, just focusing on the big cities, and the demands basically is very middle class, upper middle class, to, just wants the political reform or political democratization rather than other kind of the reforms. But anyhow, feminists and women were very active on this movement as well, and many of the pictures that viral at the time was the pictures of the women at the forefront of the protests. So now we kind of reached the last decade of the Islamic Republic, that is marked by the harsh neoliberalization and contentious politics at the same time. I would say that also the gender politics of the time has turned toward, also affected by this dominant frame, and it was kind of, as you may read from my works, is a neoliberal pronatalism, or what I call neo-pronatalist familialism, because it is a kind of returning to the, the time of being against family protection law, and, more focusing on having more population, because of the level of the involvement of the women in the society, as we said before, the number and the level of the rate of population growth become drastically decreased. That's why it is become an issue, but it is part of the pictures that is just because of the population, and other issues also kind of involving the rising political discontent, harsh economic situation because of imposition of further sanction against the Islamic Republic. All this situation and the instability with in the Middle East, all this kind of impacted the way that they decided, the Islamic Republic decided to actually accepted another or kind of follow a kind of the new neoliberal deal that is different from the previous one, from the structural adjustment policy one, because now it's focusing on the resilience issue. So people should learn to endure even more than before. And for this, family and the women's provide the best possible things in the family to unburden the task of the government and the state to give the social services to the people, because social reproduction is the heart of the importance of this situation. And when state wants to make kind of adopted with the situation and neoliberalization in the public realm, in the social realm, not just in the economy, needs this kind of how I would say that the labor of the reproductive labors of women in the household. But it doesn't mean that women are, when they're kind of pushed them back in the house through this kind of the new population and protection of the family law, means that women are not working. Basically, they were more pushed to the informal market. So each family and each household, actually they name it, is a kind of entrepreneurial space. So they should provide all the services, production and reproduction services for the whole society, instead of the state do such a things for the society. So sanction, ironically, kind of push further Iranian society to integrate it to the global market through neoliberalization. So this is the things that is, I think, very important to have in mind. So in terms of the controlling hijab, also it is become an issue to more and more controlling bodies of women, and they use the surveillance methods that got from Western world to monitoring bodies of women through, traffic cameras, through monitoring different techniques of for surveillance. They were kind of very successful to, push further women from public spaces, I would say that in this time. But at the same time, what's happening is that because of internet, because of our everything's, as I said in the previous time, it's become more viral through internet. They kind of, the issue become more and more politicized and popularized the issue of hijab. The issue of hijab was not, you know, the issue for whole the society. It was just for the women and just a fraction of women. And always this was framed as if it is, when you talk about you're against compulsory hijab, I remember clearly, many talk to you or kind of put you in pressure that this is something for bourgeois, middle class women of the society. It is not the case for the, you know, for the working class women. That is not the real, in real life. Actually, the ones that suffer more is the people from the working class, because they are that they should commute by, you know, public transportation, by going to work in the factories, the other places. But for example, women that have their own personal car is different imposing them, you know, this law. And at the same time, it is easier for the upper middle class to pay fine for the not having proper hijab, but it's not the case for the working class. So it was this kind of the framing that always was kind of a fake at the time. But fortunately, at the in this era, it has become, you know, you can see brutality of this law policing hijab and, you know, imposing the body of each of us more than before, as if for the first time. I mean, I was born there and I was from 6 years old, I used this hijab things. It was, even for me, it was internalized and it was normal at the time that I have this. And it was not always the things that I thought that is one of my priority to do this against, something against it. But then this period, it's really changed, because we see the brutality of this that is kind of the affect our bodies. So I would say that it's become very popularized and highly politicized of the whole society. Meanwhile, I think it's also important to mention, for the first time, it was the time of the, you know, in 2014, Kurdish women called a rally for supporting Rojava uprising in Sanandaj, you know, the capital of the province of Kurdistan. And they chanted for the first time, Jin Jiyan Azadi. This is also, I think, is very important and turning point, because it always is kind of, now it's the mainstream idea is that it's something just come out in the recent uprising, and this is not well known among the feminists in Iran. It was not the case. So it was very early, it started to be, you know, familiarized. Many got familiar with this idea and how it's important for the, you know, transnational feminist movement of the region. But the iconic event, I would say that in that era happened is the movement of girls of the Revolution Street. The picture that you can see in this pictures in this photo is the photo of Vida Mowahed, the first person that went stand in the utility box and, you know, just wave her scarf to the, as a performance to the public, and you can see that it was not actually very, at the time, was not very surprising. I would say not many people or men around surrounded her look at the performative act. But then it's got viral, and because it is coincident with the wave of a protest against you know, government corruptions, government and economic hardship that is also across the country happen, it's become the symbol of that. Also, they were not connected at all at the time. So it was a kind of personal resistance protest against compulsory hijab, and then the other kind of mainly working class and lower classes against the, you know, economic hardship that they suffer. This picture become the symbol of this you know, protest against Islamic Republic. So it's a kind of time that these two forms of resistance against Islamic Republic kind of encounter each other for the first time. But it's also important in the feminist movement, this act. I mean, this act then continued, other women do the same things in the same street. Then they come and hide all this and, you know, cover all this utility box. and then in other cities, and then men do the same thing. So it's become continue as a kind of wave of a protest. It's a kind of non-collective movement of people. But what is interesting is that it is connecting the everyday resistance, or I would say that everyday feminism, with a more collective, more grassroots kind of the movements together. So these two line of resistance, feminist resistance, also kind of meet each other. 5 minutes. So I don't have time, so I'm just passing the this slide to reach to the current moment. As you can see, this performative performative act of Vida Mowahed continue even in the current revolutionary movement, because it is, you know, the statement that women go and, you know, standing on the something high, and then, you know, either burn their scarf, wave their scarf, or, you know, shows the victory sign. So it's continuation, figuratively continuation of the same, I would say that the act of the girls of the revolution street. What I want to say here that I don't have time is that, so based on what I said, can we call this what's happening in Iran a feminist revolution? There are many reasons to say yes. I mean, in my reason, the first is that because it is the issue is about the disciplining the feminized bodies, and it is the most important things happen is because of compulsory hijab law. Then I had some, I can talk about it later, maybe in the discussion about gender discrimination, and, you know, there's some statistic regarding the situation of women, that how it's getting worse and worse in the last 10 years. That is another reason to, you know, women's become the forefront of protest. There are so many reasons that women's be revolted against the Islamic Republic. And then in terms of performativity, also, I would say that is a feminist. As I said, that is a continuation of the same figurative way of not crowd center, but situation center way of politics that very beautifully if you read the text of written in Jadaliya, explain that how this is different from what we know from the protest, or form of the protest, male-dominated form of protest. But what I want to add to this is that in terms of affective politics is also feminist one. And this is my argument, that in terms of the affect is also now different. As if you read my text, previous text, I was more working and kind of conceptualizing through imaginary. Now I kind of more interested to work on the affective, and I think it's a kind of revision of my works in terms of, because affect is more bodily experience. Imaginary doesn't have that experience. That's why I think that the affective understanding of the politics and revolution also very important. So what I add is that, since at the beginning of the Islamic Republic till now, the main frame and dominant effective frame of politics under Islamic Republic was fear. You're acting politically because you fear of something. I mean, the fear of death, fear of, being like Syria, fear of, the unknown future after Islamic Republic. This is the frame that Islamic Republic very successfully for 40 decades kind of imposed us, and it was the frame that we are working with, as the fear. But what's changed is that it's turned into the anger and turned to the life and care and solidarity. What's the difference from the past decades, and I would say that, for example, imaginary of survival, is that now we learn, and the society learned that actually, if they want to survive, it's through collective acts and through accepting others' differences, and, to having caring for the others. When the courts calling for the Baluchis, when the non-Muslim people calls for the support of Sunni minorities, when the workers in the refinery factories kind of the call for the support of Kurdish women, there are the sign of different type of politics that is not because of we have the same, you know, history of pain and suffering, but because their future kind of the safe, kind of connected with each other without we kind of melted into the one demand. So this is not a demand based, just one demand that we all kind of get together. So that's why I say that it is feminist one, because it is the perspective that feminists from a long time ago, from the Black feminism to different tradition, it was kind of advocating regarding, you know, care and radical kinship, how could be now practice. And then I would say that how this happened, that is this politics of care flourished or emerged or make visible, I would say that actually because of these spaces of new spaces of resistance that's coming actually from these realms of reproducing life. Islamic Republic, you know, extracting the vital resources and, you know, exploiting the, you know, production and reproduction activities of the women, of the gendered bodies, particularly feminized bodies in Iran. So the same kind of, I would say that the same kind of resistance and protest coming from this specific realm, from the reproductive realms, from the radical extended family in Iran, from the neighborhood initiative, from the female-based supporting groups, that many of them actually was kind of emerged after COVID break because there was no state to help them. They should find each other and help each other. And this network get together, and this is they are the cells of resistance, and to make it possible through this, what's now happening. And this is by now what I wanted to say. And then, yeah, I think through this presentation, I try to first de-exceptionalize the case of Iran to discuss about how it's actually connected to the world in some sense. We cannot, through exceptionalization and talking just about political Islam or some exceptional issues, or even talking just about compulsory hijab, talking about, you know, current wave of protests in Iran. Also, compulsory hijab is a cornerstone of the Islamic Republic. We can also maybe learn from this country's strategy against neoliberalism, as I mentioned, about this space of the resistance that actually related to reproductive frame, reproductive spaces. And then last but not least, thinking about politics of hijab differently in global north, in a sense that you don't need to be in one of this camp of either being, you know, anti-migrants, Islamophobic, or, you know, just supporting everything's culturally related to the political Islam. So maybe this kind of the revolutionary movement is also a good time to, again, reconsider the way that we kind of talk about hijab politics in the society. So on this note, I think now I can wrap it up my presentation.